I love the X-Men. I think the team contains some of the most interesting characters in comics. Nothing is off limits to them. We might be fighting Magneto one day, then exploring the Savage Land the next, facing an Egyptian god, or finding themselves within the midst of an intergalactic feud. We might see Prejudice one day, then Pride the next. The X-Men can be so much, do so much. There's so much potential to explore with the X-Men. So, that's where it brings us here. In a hypothetical universe in which Kevin Feige grants me access to the X-Men, I want to show you how I would make an X-Men saga. Over this saga, we will slowly get to have fun with expanding the world of the mutants, but today I want to lay out the foundation with introducing the First Class, establishing how we can work mutants into the MCU, how Magneto can keep his origin intact and exist within modern times, how the team should be portrayed, and the importance of the First Class dynamic. So, if you'll indulge me, let's take a look at how to make a good X-Men movie. Something I haven't been honest about, something I haven't told you guys, is I've been keeping a secret up until now. I've actually been working for Marvel.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Me predicting Kang Dynasty 3 years ago? Yeah, not a coincidence. Predicting Sword? Not a coincidence. Being one of the main frontrunners to push Krasinski as Reed? Then he shows up in Multiverse of Madness? Yeah, not a coincidence. How have I been doing that? Well, I've been reporting to Kevin directly. So I want to let you in on one of our meetings. So Kevin, I'm thinking of bringing in the mutants after Secret Wars. I think that'll give the new Avengers some time to shine, as well as giving the FF some breathing room.
Yeah, that sounds great, Mitch. Could we tease them, though?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do that in Miss Marvel. Let's just say she's a mutant.
What about Namor? He was the first mutant in the comics.
True. Maybe hint at him in Black Panther?
Sounds great. So,
Yeah.
when we finally arrive at introducing the mutants, how do we go about that?
Yeah.
How do we introduce them into an established universe? What about Magneto's origin? Isn't he too old now? Why would society hate mutants and not any other superhero team?
Great questions. So let's take a look at that. In my previous video, we discussed prior things that the X-Men movies could have done to improve the general quality of the films. Quick fixes, but fixes that are important nonetheless. Getting the suits right may sound surface level, but it's important to that intrinsic X-Men theme of pride and self-expression. So having our heroes embody suits that represent them, their individuality, it's important. Speaking of themes, we talked about evolving the themes so common to the X-Men. Whilst it's important to start out with mutant hate, fear, and prejudice, eventually I'd love to see a counterculture evolve, kind of like what we saw in Morrison's X-Men, a subculture or society form out of this minority. It may begin with the Morlocks, and then might grow into something like Genosha. Lastly, we discussed the importance of nailing the characters themselves, specifically Cyclops. However, I think it's imperative that we get these characters right, get the dynamic right in order for this to feel like the X-Men, for every character to serve a purpose, to be an asset to the team and not fall into the background. After all, this is an ensemble, not Wolverine and Friends. That being said, just fixing these issues isn't enough. This movie won't exist within a vacuum, it's entering an established universe, the MCU. So how do we go about that? Well, let's start off by tackling Magneto's origin. Now, as we know, the problem with Magneto's origin is that it's unique to an event from a specific time, the Holocaust. In the MCU, it's currently 2025, so I doubt they're going to cast professional dinosaur Bruce Dern as Magneto. So that presents a problem. Either change the origin and make it more current, which I just think is a horrible idea. Just don't do that. You can make the X-Men a period piece and set it in the past, but again, I think that creates more problems than it solves. Or you can offer a creative resolution. Now to me, the latter idea seems like the best. I think it'd be wise to have Magneto experience his origin all the same, goes through the Holocaust, lives a life under the radar, keeping his powers on the down low. Perhaps during the civil rights movement in the late 60s when he's around 40, he starts to speak up, championing the people and getting on the radar of the government. The events aren't important, but Eric is ultimately captured and placed into hibernation up into the early 2000s, a la something similar to the super soldier test subjects seen in Civil War. To the government, they just see him as a meta, an isolated incident. Charles Xavier, who's around 35 or 40, and his stepbrother Kane Marco, who's only 20 or so, are in Afghanistan in the early 2000s. And if you really want to make Troy's dream come true, let it be this guy. His stepbrother, Kane, is violent and charges in, seemingly disappearing in an explosion. For those that are unaware, Kane will eventually become the Juggernaut, so yeah, he's not dead. Anyways, Charles returns home declaring himself a pacifist after losing his stepbrother and his legs. He's steadfast on a mission to help others, specifically mutants like himself. He creates Cerebro thanks to a young scientist, Hank McCoy, who is also a mutant. Reaching out into the sparse mutant population that exists, he finds one in captivity. Freeing Eric, they bring him to the residence, the two developing a friendship over a series of months. Chess matches, philosophy, laughs, and drinks. Charles feels a brotherhood forming with a man out of time. Eric, thankful for having Charles bring him up to speed, for saving him. However, the more Magneto learns about humanity, the more he gets agitated. He sees history repeating itself, and he doesn't like that. He won't stand for it. Naturally, a rift forms between the two as their ideologies clash, feeling as though Charles is hiding away, not proactively doing anything to help mutants, shielding himself from the world. So Eric makes the decision to leave, to part ways from his dear friend. So, what we've done here is not only solve the issue regarding Magneto's origin, making him somewhere around 60 in age, but we've also been able to lay the groundwork for Juggernaut, tell Xavier's origin, and how Hank, who will eventually become Beast, came to know Xavier. As the saying goes, we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, or in this case, killing 4 birds with 1 stone. Naturally, this makes us pose the question, who will be Xavier's X-Men? What team will we get? To me, the only right answer is the Core 5, the First Class. So, let me convince you why that has to be. Any X-Men fan will tell you that they're the Beatles.
You, me, Jean, Warren, and Hank, we were the Beatles, Scott. Don't ever forget it.
The Beatles balanced each other out, and so do the First Class. Scott's headstrong mission-first attitude is softened by Jean's empathy and care. Iceman's jovial, fun nature is balanced out by the intellectual nature of Beast's philosophical pursuits. Angel exists in a middle ground, almost like the glue, able to make Scott laugh, flirt with Jean, be best of friends with Beast, and be a kindred spirit alongside Iceman. This is all wrapped together in the bow that is Xavier, all having a very personal relationship with him, almost acting as a father figure to them. Now, I'll come back to the First Class when we get to casting, but yeah, it needs to be them. The dynamic is just all off otherwise. You need to introduce someone as fun as Bobby before introducing someone as swashbuckling as Nightcrawler. You need to let Jean and Scott's romance build before Wolverine comes in trying to fuck it up. You need time to endear us to Marvel Girl and Angel before they become Phoenix and Archangel respectively. So yeah, this kind of ties in with having Magneto as the villain of the first movie. Look, I know Magneto has been an antagonist in almost all of the X-Men movies. It's kind of tiring, I know. I want to see new villains just as much as you guys. But part of establishing a strong foundation for a saga is to build on a solid base. Magneto is that base. If we do Magneto now, it means we get to establish the themes of prejudice early on. Have that theme evolve, and as it evolves, so does the character. Give him an arc where he dawns the white, where he goes from clashing with Xavier to joining his cause in order to fight back against Apocalypse. We see Apocalypse in the 6th movie embody Magneto's beliefs in the 1st movie, that mutants are the superior species, the natural course of evolution. Having Magneto in the 6th film face a character that embodies his old ideologies shows just how far he has come. Doing him now means we get to do Genosha down the line, the Brotherhood, or even move on to something more exciting like the Shi'ar, Mr. Sinister, or the Hellfire Club. Moving on, another huge problem is explaining mutants themselves. How do mutants exist in the MCU, and why now all of a sudden? Some have thrown out the idea of the X-Men coming over from another universe, but unless they're bringing an entire race with them, that doesn't really work. Even so, why would we care about a variant X-Men from another universe? Some have thrown out the idea of a cosmic event, the Snap for instance, or Wanda doing a reverse of the No More Mutants thing. But again, that doesn't really work. If mutants as a species can be distilled down to a single event, then that makes mutant kind that person's fault. Hate won't be directed at mutants for being what they are, they'll be directed at Wanda for speaking them into existence, or Tony for snapping them into existence. So, the only way to do this right is to have them be here this entire time, hidden, shielded from the world thanks to Xavier using Cerebro. Now, I know, it sounds like a cop-out, but it makes a shit ton of sense. And I know some of you will be like, surely the government's aware of mutants if they're out there. And hey, maybe some of them are. Maybe they just have no clue that they're a race yet. Not yet. To them, they just could be isolated incidents, just metahumans, no different to any other hero we've seen. The one exception to this belief in the government might be with Stryker, someone who had experimented on a metahuman with bone claws and a healing factor, finding that his DNA was fundamentally different, that there was potential there, that this isn't isolated. Now, upon telling the government, they decide that he is radical in his beliefs, and they push him to the side. But in doing so, that allows the government to be partially aware of the situation without understanding the full gravity of it, that these are not isolated metahumans, but a race of mutants slowly emerging, and only one man knows about it. Perhaps Xavier, using Cerebro, locates the mutants that have had their powers emerge, sending out his covert ops strike force, his X-Men, to grab them and bring them to the Institute. There, he teaches these kids how to control their abilities, whilst explaining why the team would need a jet with a cloaking device, and why Xavier would have an underground paramilitary base under his school. It just makes sense. We're creating an in-universe reason for why the X-Men would exist. I just want to double down on that for a second. How weird is it that this school has a paramilitary base under it? An in-universe reason is all we need to make this not weird. Now I get it. You're probably thinking, how many other people have been here this whole time? Well, quite a few actually. You had heroes that existed back in the day like Ant-Man and the Wasp. The Eternals have been here this whole time, evolving into ancient myth. Sorcerers have been here for centuries. A secret group of ninja women in a fortress in the sky was also here. How did we miss that? Anyway, probably the best example is Wakanda. Sure, it was alluded to, but it was hidden behind a big plasma wall. I think it's perfectly fine to do the same for the X-Men. Using his powers, Charles has made that space that occupies the X-Mansion look like a dense forest, safe from anyone who wants to come snooping. It's definitely not a leap of any kind to say that mutants have existed in the MCU this entire time. Apocalypse and Selene, some of the oldest known mutants, could have very well been explained for gods, becoming ancient myth similar to the Eternals. Wolverine could very well exist this entire time, hopping from town to town, never able to form connections as he'll outage everyone, making him a loner that does his own thing, creating that grizzled nature we know. Perhaps he even fought in World War II, just in the back there. Maybe he was friends with the Howling Commandos, a perspective we just never saw due to the focus being on Cap's story. And that's just characters. Even the stories of the MCU are begging to introduce the mutants. In Iron Man 3, Killian talked about a part of the brain that was destined to be evolved, that humanity was destined for an upgrade. What if he was right? What if his extremist serum was forcefully creating that evolution, giving upgrades to those without the X gene, hence their explosive outbursts, almost as if their bodies were fighting back against a serum that their body just could not process. Even Age of Ultron supports this. The Mind Stone unlocks a part of Pietro and Wanda's minds, a part that was destined to evolve perhaps.
Not one subject has survived direct contact.
Every subject who came in contact with the Mind Stone died, almost as if it was too much for them. Too much power perhaps? But for Pietro and Wanda, it simply unlocked a part of the brain that was destined to evolve. Now doing that to a young witch as well would boost those abilities to crazy levels of power. What I'm saying is, what if Pietro and Wanda were retconned as mutants this entire time? That they have the X gene, and that's why they survive the Mind Stone. What if past MCU movies have been telling us this entire time that mutants do in fact exist? We just haven't been able to connect the dots until now. Swinging back around to the present, we need to talk about the world our X-Men are about to inhabit. This isn't some world deprived of heroes, there's heroes aplenty here. She-Hulk showed us an entire lore division dedicated to superhero problems. Miss Marvel is showing us the rising mutants. And by the time the X-Men do make it to the big screen, we would have had the Avengers, the New Avengers, the Young Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the Defenders, perhaps even the Midnight Suns rolling around. So, what's my point? Well, it's not enough for humanity to just hate mutants because they're weird. If you did that, that means you'd have to apply that same logic to other heroes, and yet they're not hated. In the case of the Fantastic Four, they're actually celebrated, put on magazines. So, this means you'd have to create an in-universe reason for humanity to become aware of mutants in such an alarming way that they become world news, that paranoia, fear sets in and runs rampant. Now, the quickest and best ways to do that is the media. Either by a terrorist attack or a pandemic, or a combination of the two. The media, specifically the news, is an incredibly powerful tool. They have the ability to craft a narrative however they see fit. From Magneto's perspective, he might be doing something just. However, to humanity, he may look like a terrorist. The news has the ability to feed us ideas and fearmonger. What if interviews with politicians like Kelly made us question our own safety? The idea that a mutant could be at a school with our children or next door neighbor and we just wouldn't know it. From here, we might see the Mutant Response Department form in retaliation to this paranoia, the MRD. Screenings at airports become strict. An emerging mutant population who aren't able to blend in have to go underground. Morlocks. And this might be the catalyst for our story, our reason for our X-Men to finally come out of hiding, to show that there are good mutants, ones that are heroes, ones that dare to dream of a society where we can all exist together. Now, before we jump into casting, I want to quickly thank the sponsor of this video. Me, bitch. Yeah, this video is brought to you by my Patreon. There I throw down polls that help out my videos, even which videos I'm going to make. I have a few tutorials on how to make my videos. Specifically, the latest one is going to be how I script these videos. Regardless, you get early access to videos and much more. You can check it out in the link below, and with that being said, let's talk casting. For long-time viewers of the channel, you'll already know I've touched on this topic before. Although I was pretty happy with the casting at the time, I think we can do better. Now, I don't think it's worth mentioning the elephant or cannibal in the room, so let's just go over who I'm keeping. First off, one would ask, would Jeffrey Wright make the perfect Beast?
Excellent question.
Yeah, absolutely. He's exactly how to imagine Beast sounding. Plus, I've always seen Beast to be closer in age to Charles anyway. Even the hurdle of him appearing as the voice of the Watcher and as Beast is super easy to get around, seeing as Beast would be a completely CG character. I feel like his age, the way he speaks, means he'd able to carry himself in a way where he can push back against characters like Charles and Scott, not falling into the background of this ensemble. Now, Garrett Hedlund as Angel is too perfect not to do. He could totally pull off the suave aspect, as well as the darker, more layered stuff when his character transitions into Archangel. Lastly, I'm sticking with Ralph Fiennes as Professor X. As I explained in my previous video, Professor X isn't all sunshine, dreams, and wisdom. He's fallible, can be self-interested, believing he needs to help everyone even if they don't want that help. To me, Fiennes in the Bond movies demonstrates his ability to play Charles like the back of his hand. He's in the movie as a figure of authority, yet never overshadows the hero. He's able to have hard conversations, but also deliver some meaningful advice in a really salient and thought-provoking way.
You don't need to be an operative to see the obvious. It's a young man's game.
The balance of his gentle and direct sides makes Fiennes my go-to Xavier. Now for Iceman, we're going fun. I'm just going to cut to it. Rudy Pankow might be one of the most lovable guys in Hollywood. He's so effortlessly funny. Most known for Outer Banks, it was actually his role in a little short called Not Me that actually made me think he could pull this off. Bobby is known for being fun and jovial, livening up a group so downtrodden by prejudice. But that attitude is often a byproduct of not wanting to face the music, having to laugh to avoid facing trauma or pain. Humor is a common coping mechanism, and this is Bobby to a T. Rudy totally has that in him, so he's my Iceman. As for Jean and Scott, I want to cast younger than I did, yet still older than Rudy's Iceman. I think if we're doing a 6-movie saga, they need to be young enough to age into the roles, but I don't want them to start as kids either, more so just young adults. For Jean, you'll get your usual fan cast picks, Naomi Scott, Lily James, Evan Rachel Wood, and so on. But I want to cast an unknown, someone who can make this role their own, someone like Kennedy McCann. Known for Nancy Drew, Kennedy to me radiates the warmth of Jean in spades. Someone who can be an empathetic rock for those around her, while still being sarcastic and playful in a typical redhead kind of fashion. As for her partner, I think we need a Superman-esque type build for Scott. He needs to be tall, command a room with presence alone, sometimes even a look. Okay, just gonna put on the brakes here. I was totally going to cast Corin Sweat, thinking there's no way that my fan cast of him as Superman would come true. So yeah, fuck me. Turns out I'm a prophet. David's going to be Superman. So for Scott Summers, what actor would you cast? I'm just going to leave it up to you guys. Also, a bit of an odd casting, but Richard Gere would totally make a great Magneto. Yeah, Pretty Woman, Richard Gere. He just oozes that control and screen presence Magneto would need, that same presence and stature that was found in Wolverine and the X-Men. Someone that talks with a sense of presence and control. Just an idea, but yeah, if anyone has any other better ideas, then let me know. Now that we've worked through all the must-know information, how the X-Men and mutants can and will work within the MCU, let's go into telling that story. So, this is movie 1 in my X-Men saga, so join me as we take a look at how to make a good X-Men movie. Alright, so the movie begins in the streets of New York. We see normal people walking around, sounds of TVs and screens talking about superheroes and the state of the world. Here we're establishing that superheroes are the norm. This is our status quo. It might even be nice to see the Human Torch fly by in the distance, because at this point the Fantastic Four would have been established. We then follow a character running through the streets of Times Square listening to Cold 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 by Cage the Elephant. This song is about a character seeking out help from a psychiatric hospital because he doesn't feel well, like something's wrong with him. Don't worry, this will make sense. So, we find out that this character is Bobby. He's replying to texts whilst running, half looking where he's going, weaving in and out of people to the sound of the tune. His friends saying to hurry up, that you're late, following up another text saying that she'll fail you if you don't get here on time. Just as Bobby sees the text, he runs into someone, dropping his things all over the floor. The music stopping as his headphones fall off. In a panic, trying to pick things up, he notices the wet cement floor start to turn icy. The ice starts to form on his fingers as he's noticeably stressed. Consuming his body, the ice starts to shoot out from his hands uncontrollably. People start to run. Not wanting to hurt anyone, he crouches down and tries to aim his hands in at himself. In a crouched position, eyes closed, he notices everything going quiet. He opens his eyes to see a woman standing above him. Jean says, "Would you like some help, Bobby?" Confused as to whom the woman is, as to how she knows his name, he looks at her in disbelief and confusion. He takes her hand. We then see humanity resume consciousness, confused as to where the Iceman, disappeared to. Now the chorus of Cold, Cold, Cold starts to play now in a non-diegetic way as the Marvel logo appears. So that's how we're opening our movie. Bobby being recruited by the X-Men. We've shown that superheroes are the norm. We've seen the POV of the average citizen in the MCU. A POV will come back to as mutants emerge, as they'll start to fear them. We've shown that mutant powers can emerge due to severe stress. We've shown how the X-Men have been able to stay under the radar, acting like ghosts when mutant matters occur, and we've applied music that fits the character, music that is fun and fits the pace, but music that applies to the themes we'll soon explore. Someone who feels like something is wrong with him, that he needs help. So, Bobby will be our POV character. He's going to discover everything along with us. Picking up with the X-Jet as it zooms over upstate New York, we see Bobby in the back of the plane feeling introverted, a little scared. This not made any better when he looks to the cockpit and sees a blue furred hand reach for some controls. Beast might make some offhanded comment about the security cameras jamming the signals, and that's why there's no footage of the event. We see the jet go into camouflage mode, turning invisible as it zips over the tree line. Jean turns to Bobby, sits with him. She says how everything's going to be okay. He starts to flutter with questions, and this is when she touches his temples and simply says, "Sleep." Bobby passes out. Picking up with Beast, he says to Jean, "You can't just knock out every scared mutant we bring to the mansion." Jean says that it's not just for his safety, but ours. That this is probably the most powerful elemental they've experienced, potentially Omega-level capabilities. Beast acknowledges her logic, as he tells Jean that we've arrived. Jean uses her telepathy to uncover the forest, revealing its true nature to be the X-Mansion. Big reveal, musical cue, kids playing, using mutant abilities, all that jazz. Now, the next scene should acclimatize us to this all. We see Bobby wake up at the mansion. In a bed not his own, he is confused. Did he dream this all? What's going on? Just as he sits up, he hears the sound of a man, turning with great speed to see who's in the room, but there's no one there. He hears him again, this time putting his arms up, out, aiming at the door. The man tells Bobby to come downstairs. Bobby goes to shoot ice out from his palms, but nothing's coming out. Bobby realizes he doesn't have any control over his abilities. The man follows it up with, "When you're done, you can come down and I'll show you how to control your gifts, Bobby." So, Bobby comes downstairs. Entering a library room, he sees the back of a man in a wheelchair. Jean sitting with him. Recognizing her, he asks Jean, "What is this place?" Charles turns and answers instead. "This is a school, Bobby." In disbelief, he starts to ask questions. A school with a jet? From here, Charles explains the mission statement, that he created the Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. Hidden from the world in secret, it's designed to help young mutants with their emerging abilities. A few powerful pupils have joined Xavier's mission, acting as his covert ops agents, his X-Men, if you will, recruiting young mutants with powers too out of control for them to figure out on their own. Hanging above him from the ceiling chandelier, reading a book upside down, he jumps down with a thud. Reaching out his beastly hands for a handshake, he says, "Pleasure to meet you, Hank McCoy." Reserved and cautious, he shakes this giant's hand. Xavier follows up by saying, "My first pupil should be entering any moment now." Bobby turns to the door and awaits it opening, just as the audience does in anticipation. Scott enters. Smiling in a charming way, he enters the room. He walks across, kisses Jean on the forehead before coming in to shake Bobby's hand. "Glad to know they got you in one piece," he says. "Scott Summers, mission coordinator." Jean steps on his foot. He corrects himself. Sorry, math and PE. Charles looks at Scott and Jean with a smirk. "Let me show you something, Bobby." Pulling a book in a shelf, it reveals an elevator. Nervously stepping in with the professor, they take the lift. Our X-Men slowly moving out of sight. Naturally asking a lot of questions, he asks, "What is this? Why is there a secret base under a school?" Xavier doesn't really answer. Instead, he goes on about evolution, asking Bobby what he knows about DNA. Bobby can joke, saying that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Charles snorting in retort, "Very good, but what do you really know?" Now this conversation continues as the two enter Cerebro, Bobby in awe of the dome-like room. Following the professor down the corridor, he continues by stating that within a select few of us is an X gene. When awoken, it can unlock a part of the mind that is destined to evolve. If the muscle is harnessed, Trained, we can develop fantastic gifts. Now, this ties directly to what Killian was talking about in Iron Man 3, a part of the brain destined to be evolved, a muscle ready to evolve. It also explains how Pietro got his powers, a part of the brain unlocked by the Mind Stone. Charles continues, "This room was designed by our furry friend upstairs. We call it Cerebro. It was designed to amplify my telepathy. The room all of a sudden begins to show a swath of people flying by." Charles continues, "It's what allowed me to find new mutants like yourself. It's what allowed me to create a standstill in Times Square this morning for Jean to grab you unnoticed, and it's what allowed me to shield the school from prying eyes. All the people you see right now are other mutants. There's more and more by the day, some with dangerously powerful gifts. This might be a great time to hint at the Uncanny cast coming in the next movie, maybe show their silhouette or something." As Charles exits Cerebro with Bobby, he says that these gifts need to be honed, that we may present a danger to society if we cannot control them. As he says this, he presents Bobby to the danger room. We see Scott and Jean maneuvering inside, dodging moving walls, having each other's back, and so forth. Bobby is enamored by how graceful the two look, how in control of their abilities they are. As the session ends, Scott turns to Bobby and says, "Alright kid, let's see what you're made of." Jean says you're an Omega, so let's see if you sink or swim. He asks what an Omega is, Jean replying, "It's just a class level. Some mutants might have non-lethal abilities, while some might be quite destructive. Based on your powers, you have the potential to cause a lot of damage, so Omega it is." As the door closes, Bobby faces the empty room. Trepidatious, nervous, Xavier senses this. On comms, Xavier says out loud, "To think of your gifts like a muscle, turning it on and off, on and off. Breathe. In and out, in and out." Bobby, inhaling, calming down, notices the air coming from his mouth starting to chill, working up to the point where he takes his ice form for the first time. Taking on Cerebro, he starts out pretty good, freezing objects coming at him, but as things get more demanding, they start to overwhelm him. Too much for the new student. The scene ending with Cyclops leaving the viewing deck, not too impressed. Cutting to an undisclosed location in New York, we see Senator Kelly, who represents the state of New York, start to ask questions, showing a video recording of Iceman having his explosive outburst in Times Square. A bit of camera static, then disappearing, stating, "This is the 10th metahuman activity we've seen across the states in the last 3 months. Something goes down and then boom, they're gone. Where the hell are these people?" Kelly is cut off by a man in the back, Boulevard Trask. "They're not metahumans," he says. "They're a species." "Species?" Kelly replies. "You're saying there's a whole race of these guys?" "I'm saying that this isn't an isolated incident." He follows up by stating that he was the lead scientist on the extremist serum working for Killian. However, Killian failed to understand a simple component. You cannot force evolution for those that do not have the right genetic makeup, those that do not have the X gene. This is what resulted in Killian having such explosive results. Their bodies weren't made to evolve. Other members on the board ask why they haven't seen this race until now. Trask responds, "We have. Throughout history we called them gods, monsters," obviously alluding to Apocalypse or creatures like Wendigo. He states that we have created stories to explain genetic anomalies, stories to explain away the things that go bump in the night. But now we know these things are simply a genetic mutation. Now there might be some pushback by other government officials, but Kelly is quiet, soaking this all in. He asks Trask questions that correlate with them being a race, a species, with them disappearing in the exact same way across the country, insinuating that they could be a threat to national security. All disappearing the same way? Seems a bit suspicious. Together, they could be dangerous, the scene ending with the other members of the board starting to feel the same sense of quiet and fear that Kelly is experiencing, cautious of a race all disappearing in a similar way. Back at the mansion, we see Bobby in the library with Beast. Beast reorganizing some shelves or something, whilst Bobby is helping him out. Specifics really aren't important here, we just want to show off Bobby's comedic presence and lackadaisical attitude, as well as Beast's philosophy on life, that just because you can be destructive doesn't mean you have to be. Further going on to explain the idea of being a pacifist, believing in non-violent methods in order to resolve conflict. Essentially, we're laying out Beast's philosophy, his values, and ethics. Something to remember in storytelling is that characters are the mouthpiece of the writer or the director. In Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi is used as Lucas's mouthpiece for the world, to discuss his own philosophy on life, good and evil, and so on.
Pleasure is purely self-centered. It's all about your pleasure. It's about you.
I need him!
It's a selfish, self-centered emotion.
What have I done?
That's created by a self-centered motive of greed.
Your new empire
Joy is compassion. Joy is giving yourself to somebody else or something else.
Let go.
And it's a kind of thing that is, in its subtlety and lowness, much more powerful than pleasure. If you get hung up on pleasure, you're doomed. If you pursue joy, you will find everlasting happiness.
Turning to the X-Men, one might say Xavier is our mouthpiece, stating his own philosophy, one of unity, teamwork, and peace. Now these ideas can be made more complex by creating a web of characters that all relate to the central theme. Other characters like Beast, Cyclops, or Magneto might have different perspectives on this philosophy, ideologies that clash and create some interesting conversations, back and forths that challenge our central theme and force the main character, Scott Summers, to find some kind of truth in it all. Back to the story, Bobby might contrast Hank's idealism with some immature line about how Beast looks terrifying but is actually quite a softie. Hank rolling his eyes as the scene transitions out of the window, panning to two figures walking up a hill in the distance. We see Scott and Jean walking up a hill, laying down a picnic under a tree, the school in the background, the two sharing a moment. The specifics really aren't important, just lovey-dovey stuff. Perhaps Jean goes to kiss Scott. She says to remove his glasses. Scott says no with caution. She says that it's okay, that she's been practicing in an excited tone. Scott, with a pause, decides to trust her. He slowly removes his glasses, Jean focusing on containing his optic blast. He slowly opens his eyes. The two, happy it's working, decides to share a kiss. Jean is lost in the kiss and forgets to keep control over his eyes. Scott, when opening, blasts a beam, narrowly missing her but sending a clear hole straight through the tree. Now the two might laugh about it, it might be a cute moment, but Jean controlling Scott's blast will totally come back in the third act. I just think it's tight storytelling if we lay down moments in the beginning for our characters to then capitalize on in the third act. Laughing about the situation, we see the two's candid loving scene contrasted by a swift change in music as we see the introduction of the main villain, Magneto. Now I say introduction with a grain of salt. To me, some of the best villains have a level of absence. We see the aftermath of their destruction. Have them initially be a simple force of nature, experience things through others, with their motives being ambiguous up until a certain point. This is kind of what I want to achieve with Magneto, have a level of mystery up until we reveal his intentions, that we're keeping our heroes in the dark with the audience. We get to be shocked with them as we find out his history, his goals. In the dead of night, we cut to an undisclosed military base, two soldiers at a blockade talking during their shift, making jokes back and forth when one of them is pinned up against a wall. The other one, in shock, begins to swear, "What the?" And he too is lifted into the air. Quickly slammed into the ground and knocked out, we see a low shot of a boot making its way to the ground, followed by a purple cape. Cutting to inside the base, we see a huge metal door carved open. All that stands there is the silhouette of a man. This short scene is seen from the soldier's perspective. Raising their weapons to the man, we see him stop their bullets midair, collecting them as they fire upon him. Raising both of his hands, he swipes either way, sending all the soldiers through the opposing walls next to them. Cutting to a lab, a soldier is telling a scientist to hurry up as he's transferring files to Trask and scrubbing the base's computers. All the sounds of gunfire stop outside the room, the soldier aiming his weapon at the door, nervous, awaiting his doom. The scientist says the transfer and scrub is complete, the door opening. The scientist smiled, turning to concern as the silhouette engrosses the doorframe. The soldier opened fires as the music crescendos in a huge way, the scene ending in a smash cut. So, right now we haven't met Magneto, but we're still trying to characterize him by giving him goals. Clearly, he was after something, but what was it? Well, our next scene will help give us some context, show us what he was after. Cutting to a morning sky, we see a beautiful sunrise, pink fairy floss clouds, still and patient. Warren, Angel, crashes through them. We see him soar in the sky. There isn't much plotting reason for this scene, I just think it'd be really nice to see him enjoy his gifts. To see him soar through the sky, hug the side of a mountain face like a wingsuiter, or barrel down towards the ground like a jet. Returning home, he lands on his balcony. Not making his entrance known, he overhears that his father has company, so he decides to stay behind a pillar and listen in. In the room, we see Kelly and Warren's father talking. Kelly talks to Warren's father as if he's an old friend, asking for funding for an experimental project, explaining the urgency of it, that last night his research facility was attacked. Luckily, that they transferred the information out to Trask, and with the funding, they can fast track this much needed project. Warren's father is curious, he wants to know more about the project, Kelly replying with a simple word, Sentinel. Kelly follows this, explaining how Homo sapiens, humans, are in danger by a mutated strand of humanity, that eventually to defeat them they'll have to develop a network, a master mold, so that none can hide. Warren's father pulls back, saying that he can't help with that, in a way trying to protect his son, someone he knows very well to be a mutant. Kelly, not liking his response, turns from an old friend to manipulative senator very quickly as he blackmails Warren's father into helping, saying how he knows how he made his billions. Begrudgingly, he agrees to help as Kelly leaves the room. Warren's father lets out a sigh of exhaustion as he turns to face the balcony only to see his son standing there, the morning light glowing off his silhouette. Naturally, an argument ensues, Warren coming from a place of, how could you do this, I'm a mutant, and his father coming from a place of wanting to protect his family, his interests, and his life. Warren states that these Sentinels will kill thousands, potentially millions of his kind. The argument heated ends with Warren's father calling his son a freak. Warren pauses, stands on the balcony's edge, ready to fly away. He faces back at his father. I may be a freak, but at least I'm not a monster. Moving back towards our heroes, we see Charles and Scott in a chess match. We see a game of wit, with the two having fun taking their time. Charles saying that he likes to play Scott due to the simple fact that he cannot predict what move he'll make regardless of the ability to read minds. That Scott has a minimum of 20 to 30 plans for every situation he puts himself in. Now, whilst the two are talking about chess, the subtext, what Charles is really talking about, is Scott being a leader. That he admires his analytical side, to look at things and find the correct truth. Scott affirming this truth with the dream of a day where mutants and humans can live as one. Keeping the story going, we see Jean step into the room in a rush. Turning on the television, we see Senator Keller rolling out a new subsidiary of the American military, the MRD, the Mutant Response Department. Kelly calls out mutants publicly for the first time, explains the danger that they pose, spending the next 2 minutes smearing them and fear-mongering. Scott turns back to the chessboard, making one move and calls check. Charles moves his piece, but Scott has won. Checkmate. Charles congratulates Scott. You've won, he says. Scott replies, not yet, Charles. We haven't won yet. Obviously not talking about the chess match. Cyclops tells Jean and Beast to make their way to the jet, that they're checking this out. Bobby interjects, what about me? Scott turns to Bobby, you're not ready, kid. Your performance in the danger room showed me that. Bobby kicks back, saying he wants to be a part of this, that if he's going to be an X-Man and a useful asset, he needs in-field training. Scott takes a moment to reconsider. Fine, but you'll follow my lead. Bobby races towards the jet, the scene ending with Jean looking at Scott with a look that says, he's not ready, and this isn't a good idea. Cutting to the rally, we then see Kelly finish up a speech, fear-mongering, all that, typical mutant hate stuff. Taking a seat next to Warren's father, the podium is then handed to Trask, talking about a way to protect themselves against mutant domination. Slowly seeing the X-Men approach, we see our heroes in a typical Marvel disguise. Baseball caps and sunglasses, baby. However, they aren't the only ones in disguise. Warren in a trench coat is also in the crowd watching on from a distance. Blending into the crowd, the X-Men are watching Trask talk with a moderately sized object hiding under a sheet behind him. Unveiling the Sentinel, he explains it has the ability to detect mutants at will. It stands up to show its true size. 6 stories tall, dwarfing our heroes. Going online, we see its POV as it locks eyes with Scott in the crowd, simply saying, mutant detected. The Sentinel aims its hand at Scott, charging its repulsor to fire. Jean uses her abilities to move the hand of the Sentinel last second, making it fire at the ground instead. People start to scatter in a panic. Kelly yells at Trask, telling to shut it down. Trask saying it's not obeying his commands, it's not answering the remote. The Sentinel takes its first step and Cyclops says it's time to get out of here. A chase ensues, with Scott and Jean making an exit in a hastily fashion. Jean using her telepathic link with the team to tell Beast to start the jet. Bobby, however, is still new to all this and struggles to keep up with the pair, eventually being tagged by the Sentinel. Scott turns and goes back for Bobby. Just as it looks like the Sentinel is going to fire, Scott pulls down his glasses and blasts its hand clean off. All of a sudden, Warren swoops in, grabbing Bobby and helping him to the jet. The 5 somewhat defeated, understanding the grim reality of what these Sentinels on a large enough scale means for mutant kind. This is a defeat. Hard cutting to a still and painterly frame, we see our X-Men all in the room. Beast, Charles, and Warren are talking with one another. Jean is sitting with Cyclops, consoling Scott with his head face down. As for Bobby, he's draped over the couch, injured from his slight scuffle. Now, Warren introduces himself and discusses with Charles and Hank the severity of Kelly's plan, that this is just the beginning. Sentinels aren't the end goal here, but as Kelly said, to have a network of them, a master mold. Sentinels learning off each other in real time, that as soon as they become a hive mind, that means the end for mutant kind, that no one can hide. Charles and Beast asks Warren where this is being developed. Warren says he's not sure, that the original facility was attacked by a man that tore down a steel door with his mind, that caught bullets in midair. Whilst Warren is talking, Xavier's eyes squint at that information, almost as if he knows something. Hank picks up on Xavier's expression but doesn't say anything. Xavier asks if there's any other facilities like that. Warren, not sure, shrugs, although he does remember Kelly talking about a Trask. Beast adding on, the scientist from the rally? Yeah, Warren confirms. The three understand that any progress they want to make regarding stopping Master Mold going online is in finding Trask. This is interrupted with Cyclops standing up and leaving the room in a haste. Jean turning to the three saying, he'll be fine, he's just processing how things went wrong so quick. He's just not used to that. So, we cut to Angel and Beast following Xavier into Cerebro. As this is happening, we're cross-cutting with Cyclops in the Danger Room, training an alpha-level program. Hank tells Xavier to be careful, that Xavier has never used Cerebro to find a human before, only mutants. That many souls might fry his mind, it might be too much. This is paralleled by the cross-cutting of Cyclops being overwhelmed by an increasingly hard training simulation. Charles and Scott, both matching intensity as they reach their goals. Charles locates Trask and the base he is at, and Psych is standing surrounded by the rubble caused by the Danger Room session. He yells out, Danger Room, activate program Omega. Now, Jean looks on from the viewing deck. Bobby joins her, feeling like a disappointment. Being the reason Cyclops had to turn around, he explains his worries about being a part of this team, that it's all too much. To Bobby, it looks like Scott and Jean have things figured out, aided by the example Scott leads in the Danger Room by making light work of the program. Bobby says, look at him, he's perfect. I'm just not made to be an X-Men. Jean looks at Bobby with a pause. She feels his concerns about not being enough, about not having control over his abilities. Instead of just reassuring him, she also aims to make a point out of finding purpose, so she tells Bobby to come closer, that she wants to show him something. She puts her hands on his temples, and we're taken into the past. Here, we see Scott Summers' origin, at least briefly. Her point is that Scott wasn't always the perfect hero. He was the most lost, the most out of control of the X-Men. We see him waking up from his head injury, told his family is dead. We see his mutant powers manifesting at the Essex orphanage. We see him feeling like a monster, approached by Professor X and becoming his first pupil, changing his life and making him believe in his cause, giving Scott direction, something to aim for, going from a boy with no family, no life, to finding a home with Charles. Bobby pulls back, still reserved. He isn't completely sold that he can reinvent himself the same as Scott, so Jean goes to double down and reaffirm her point. Touching Bobby's temples again, she shows him the moment Jean and Scott first met. We're taken down a street with floating cars. Jean out of control, the same as Scott once was. Xavier and Summers introduce themselves, Jean taking an interest to the cute boy in the sunglasses, giving him a smile. She enters his mind and the two have a conversation whilst Xavier and Jean's father talk out loud. Scott explains that he was just as out of control as you, that she doesn't need to fear her powers, that the professor can help, that he can help. She smiles. Jean cuts her dad off saying she wants to go with them. Bobby confused asking Jean why she showed him that. She says, Scott isn't just a good soldier, a guy who found purpose with Xavier. He's also a great leader. He can make you rally, believe in yourself like no other. Maybe before leaving the Institute, have a word with him. Cyclops exits the Danger Room to see Bobby facing him. The two have a conversation. Bobby admitting that he jokes and keeps things candid to avoid facing his problems, his failings head on. Scott says that facing things head on is the only way, that we can't run around the mountain forever. Eventually we have to climb it. Scott uses himself as an example, that he wants to be better, has to be better, that his team lives and dies on his decisions, the ones he loves, his family, Jean, Hank, the professor rest now on his decisions in the field. He puts his hand on Bobby's shoulder saying, it wasn't your fault you were struck in the field, it was mine. Jean joins the pair downstairs. Scott continues, I never should have put you in that situation. Bobby smiles, feeling a weight lifted off his shoulders. Still wanting to prove his value to the team, to a leader he actually believes in, he runs into the Danger Room and says, activate program. Scott yells out in a panic that the room is still set to Omega as the door shuts on him. Jean and Scott look at each other in a worry. Racing up to the viewing deck to disable the program, the two are shocked to see Iceman holding his own in an Omega level program. His constructs are more solid, his movement is fluid. Jean has her hand above the disable button ready to press it. Cyclops grabs her wrist. No, Don't turn it off. Mesmerized by his grace, they see Bobby come into his own. With a newfound belief in his abilities, he's able to form his first ice path. The music is operatic and triumphant. Jean and Scott happy that he's making this Omega level program look like a walk in the park. After this scene, Bobby is on high of excitement for overcoming his self-doubt, telling the professor he just completed an Omega level program. Hank snaps and looks at Xavier in judgment. This is not a good thing. Bobby asks Angel to race him outside, and Hank interjects, "Go on, Warren. I need to speak with the professor." Now, just to put things on hold for a second, I want to talk about the Rashomon effect. Essentially, it's a principle in cinema closely tied to the ideas of truth. It might be how a character remembers something versus how it actually played out. It can also be about multiple characters' truth regarding the same events. In regards to the scene here, we have Bobby having completed an Omega level training simulation. To different characters, with different contexts, this can be interpreted many different ways. To Iceman, he might be excited about overcoming his self-doubt. To Charles, he might find pride in his pupil accomplishing a goal. But to Hank, this is concerning. Hank has a chat with Charles. He doesn't like how young Bobby is, stating that Jean, Scott, now Bobby, all were kids when they first joined. That it looks like Charles is making his own private army. Kids, soldiers, easily indoctrinated, manipulated into believing Charles' worldview, fighting what appears to be a looming war with humanity. He doesn't like the direction this is going, that children should not be fighting a war, reiterating their original mission statement. What happened to peaceful resolution? What happened to the dream? Charles kicks back slightly defensive, saying Jean and Scott are now in their mid-20s. They're fully grown adults now. They can leave at any time. Hank says, "You've raised Scott and Jean since they were 16. There's no leaving. You're like a father to them. All I'm saying is this direction we're going down does not have peace waiting for us." Charles states, "This is peace. We're just defending ourselves. They have to be trained." Hank cuts Charles off. "Charles, you know this is more than defense. Omega simulations were designed to be offensive." Charles cuts Hank off. "You know, these kids would be in MRD holding facilities right now without the X-Men." Hank says, "I know. I just want to believe that we're still the good guys. That we don't have to sink to Kelly's level to carry out this dream." The scene ending with Charles giving Beast a warm smile, almost as if to say, "We are still the good guys." So, from here we cut to the X-Men going over a mission brief. Cyclops is leading the brief. He creates a plan that works to the strengths of the team. Their goal is to infiltrate the base Trask is at, shut down Master Mold, and leave without a trace. While Scott is explaining the plan, we see it in motion, them carrying out exactly what he's saying. Warren will keep a bird's eye view, telling the team when to act, when to move. Iceman will freeze the security still. Jean will float Beast, Cyclops, and herself in. The three float into a blackened room, the warehouse lights turning on slowly to show a barrage of Sentinels, at least 30 standing there waiting to go online. Hank going to work on corrupting the Master Mold program terminal. They get to the control panel, and all seems well when they hear a thud. The base, shaking. We hear gunfire. Jean asks Angel what's going on, to give an update from the sky, but she doesn't get a response. Cutting to Angel, we see him lying unconscious in the forest, a purple cape walking by his unconscious body. Back with the X-Men, Iceman is defending the door whilst the others carry on with the mission. Cyclops doesn't like this. Something feels off. Iceman says, "I'll check it out." Scott cuts him off though. "No, stay here." We complete the mission, then we find Warren. We're stronger together. I want to highlight Scott's strategic ability. I don't want him making dumb decisions, so yeah, in no way would Iceman go off by himself. Cutting to Magneto, he makes a forced entry which sets off alarms at the base. Gunfire opens and we see a very similar turn of events to the first base. Soldiers made light work of. We hear the gunfire from the X-Men's perspective, bullets striking the other side of the door they're on. Our heroes nervously awaiting what lies for them. Seeing the door tear open like paper, we see Scott fire without hesitancy. Magneto shielded by a magnetic wave he pulls up. Jean levitates to take him on from the sky. Iceman goes to his left and shoots a barrage of ice picks at him. From here we see the X-Men try their best, but this is a threat they've never faced before. One by one, they're taken out by metal objects around the room, put up against a wall. Scott lasting the longest, dodging and evading, very similar to the Omega training we saw moments before. Now this is the moment we finally reveal Magneto's identity. We see his face for the first time, big reveal and so forth. Hank, who is pinned up against the wall, shouts out to the man he recognizes, "Eric!" To our X-Men's shock, it looks like Hank knows this man. Magneto comes closer. "Hank, is that you?" he says. "You're so blue." From here we get a bit of a villain monologue, Magneto explaining his reasoning for attacking the base, or bases. Eventually our heroes understand that they want the same thing on the surface, to be rid of humanity's desire to oppress mutant kind. to destroy Master Mold. Whilst Magneto is monologuing, Cyclops is slowly freeing himself, wiggling his hand free. Magneto states that he came here to destroy Master Mold before it becomes operational, but it looks like the X-Men had beat him to it, something he thanks them for. All of a sudden we see backup soldiers arrive, opening fire. Magneto repels the bullets, carves open the roof. He tells Cyclops, "Do tell Charles I said hello." Obviously he'd say this in a smug way. Just as he says this, Scott frees himself. Magneto makes his exit whilst being fired upon by Scott. Scott frees the other X-Men, and the four now have to fight with their backs up against the wall. They have to fight the military to get out. Beast picking up Angel along the way, and Jean getting shot in the leg on the way out. So, forced to make a retreat, our heroes are defeated and are burning with two very large questions. Beast is surprised to see Eric alive, and Cyclops wants to know what Charles is keeping from him. The man he thought was his father is keeping a lot of secrets. The silent return in the jet back to the mansion speaks volumes. Heroes unhappy with their performance. Heroes feeling betrayed or lied to. Charles has a lot of answering to do. Landing in the school, Scott is the first off the X-Jet, beelining for Xavier. Coming up the elevator in a right mood, we see Cyclops burst into a class Xavier's teaching, his smile dropping as sight gets in his face. "What the hell was that?" he says. "Who the hell is Eric?" Xavier dismisses the class. Beast follows him into the room, adding to the fire. "You told me Eric died, Professor," Kato explained. Seeing as I want to let that suspense simmer for a bit, I want to cut back to the government. Kelly, Trask, Warren's father, and a bunch of government officials talking about the attack that just occurred. They pull up security footage showing a correlation between the same icy explosion in New York with one of the operatives that attacked that base. To the government, and specifically to Kelly, it looks like they are clearly creating a private army of mutants. It's then followed up with footage of Magneto attacking the base, the same person who attacked the first one. Kelly naturally comes to the conclusion that they must be working together, and that this master of magnetism, this Magneto, must be their leader. Trask, however, isn't one to let an opportunity go to waste, stating that in their retreat, one of the soldiers placed a tracker on the jet. We see footage of this happening, and in the footage, we see Beast carrying Angel. Warren's father sees the footage. His eyes flare as he's watching this. Kelly sees Warren's father in distress. "You alright?" he asks. Knowing he has to keep his cool and not out his son as a mutant, he says, "I'm fine," in a calm demeanor, shrugging it off. Opening up a map, they show the X-Jet is currently situated in a forest in upstate New York. Kelly confused, saying it's just a forest. Trask responds, "Well, thermals are reading otherwise. Upwards of 150 signatures are being picked up at this location. I'm betting these missing mutants over the last 3 months are probably there." Now, cutting back to the X-Mansion, this is the scene where we go over Magneto's origin, Xavier's origin, filling in the gaps of their past. Charles explains, Eric was the product of one of the evilest atrocities known to man. Here we see the Holocaust, surviving it with the Howling Commandos liberating the camp. Perhaps the one with the handlebar mustache can tell him that everything's going to be okay or something like that. From here we then explain the origin I laid out before with Magneto being placed into cryo-freezing sometime in the 60s, a la something similar to the soldier experiment seen in Civil War. Fast forward, Charles and his stepbrother Kane are fighting in Afghanistan. Kane disappears in an explosion. Charles loses the ability to walk thanks to a spinal injury, and the trauma doesn't just awaken his powers, but directs him to find peaceful resolutions to conflicts, stating that fighting got him nowhere, that it took his stepbrother and his legs. Teaching at a college, he peers into the mind of one of his brightest students, Hank McCoy. Hank's inner thoughts betray him. He tells himself that he's a monster for his mutated feet, something he's kept a secret. Letting Hank in on his secret as well, the two develop Cerebro to amplify the professor's abilities and find others like them. The most troubling one they find was a man with a very light brain activity, suspended in cryo-freezing, Eric. Freeing Eric, they bring him to the residence, the two developing a friendship over a series of months. Chess matches, philosophy, laughs and drinks. Charles feels a brotherhood forming with a man out of time. They even go so far as to make a helmet to stop Charles cheating at chess, from reading Eric's mind. The two discuss dreams of teaching other mutants, of making this residence a school, to let people like Hank stay full-time. Eric is thankful for Charles giving him this life, for bringing him up to speed, for saving him. However, the more Eric learns about humanity, the more he gets agitated. He sees history repeating itself, and he doesn't like that. Naturally, a rift forms between the two as their ideologies clash, feeling as though Charles is hiding away, shielding himself from the world, that he's not doing anything to protect mutants. So Eric makes the decision to leave, to part ways from his dear friend. that the dream of a school died with Eric leaving. When Hank goes to ask where Eric went, Charles says that the dream they started out on died, that Eric left. Now naturally Hank will want to go find him, but Charles says no. He puts his hands on Hank's temples and plants a false memory of the cryo catching up with him, dying of natural causes. To Hank, Eric is dead. Hearing this, the X-Men sit in silence. Charles goes to apologize, but Cyclops cuts him off. "You've said enough, Charles." Everyone in the room is silent. Charles looks at Hank, but he looks away. In this moment, our heroes are at their lowest. Angel is injured, Jean too. Beast has been lied to, and Cyclops feels betrayed. The only one unscathed by this revelation has been Iceman, naive to the situation's gravity. I think it'd be nice if Iceman stood up, said his piece. Sure, he might get a bit of kickback by other members, but I want him to stand his ground. Not taken serious as the funny one, I want him to break and be stone cold here. That wasn't a pun, I didn't intend that. I want him to cut to the core truths about every character. He says, "Scott, you don't need to put the weight of the world on your shoulders. I get it, you want to protect the family you've made, but you need to let us bear some of that weight as well. Jean, without you, I wouldn't be here. Your heart is the connective tissue that binds us all. Your kindness, your gentleness is not a weakness. Warren, you need to know that you are not your father. Your power is amazing. Flight, are you kidding me? You're literally an angel. And Hank, you have every reason to be upset. The professor interfered with your memories, but he did it because he wants to help." Despite this passionate speech, the X-Men are only half in. They listen to Bobby pour his heart out, but Beast and Cyclops are still holding some resentment towards Charles, and rightfully so. There's no time for that, however, as we see a Sentinel hand smash its way into the room. Suddenly, their minor disputes, the arguments and betrayals don't matter. As that washes away, we see our heroes searching for each other in the rubble. Beast looking for the professor. The Sentinel hand goes to grab Hank, but Cyclops jumps in the way, blowing the hand clean off. Angel shoots into the air above to see more incoming Sentinels. Jean uses her powers, pushes one into the other, making it crash down. Cyclops tells Hank to get the professor to Cerebro, that it's the safest room in the building. Cyclops exits the building, jumping down into a superior landing. He stands and says, "To me, my X-Men." There's a big musical cue as we see our first class working together as a team, taking on multiple Sentinels. Angel picking up Scott, dropping him on one Iceman, going Omega, creating huge walls of ice and freezing Sentinels where they stand. As for Jean, she reaches out and crushes a tree. She turns it horizontal, throwing it at a Sentinel with great speed, piercing it right through its head. Essentially, we get to see the X-Men do their thing, show off some powerful moments. Meanwhile, Hank has just dropped Xavier down. Charles says thank you. Hank pauses. This isn't over Charles, as he turns to join the battle, the scene ending with Beast leaping into battle. Cutting to Magneto, who is meditating atop the Empire State Building, he sees a red beam go off in the distance. Heading down to Times Square, he sees news helicopters covering the battle much closer, seeing the X-Mansion under attack. Now whilst this isn't his ally anymore, Charles is still a good friend, so to see Sentinels go after them like this is just unacceptable. To Eric, this is a brother, and for a short time it was once his home. Cutting to Kelly's office, he's doing some paperwork, perhaps on the phone to Warren's father about more funding. However, as he's on the phone, he starts to see a paperclip start to float. Touching it with his finger, it continues to float. All of a sudden, windows burst open. Magneto enters. Flipping his desk over and putting him up against the wall, he says, "You would dare attack Charles Xavier?" Kelly confused, saying, "It was meant to be you." Magneto responds, "What do you mean? What was meant to be me?" Kelly continues, "It was meant to be your hideout. Those were your associates, the X-Men." Magneto, frustrated with Kelly's insolence, holds him over the edge by his throat. Kelly is terrified. Magneto states, "What I do alone. Nothing gets done otherwise. Mutants have had to live in hiding for years, and you Weasley little man have blown it all to hell. We lived in peace. Hidden, but peace. You've disrupted that peace, threatening to round mutants up. Who do you think you are? Your MRD is the closest humanity has come to the Holocaust in over 80 years. Kelly responds, "What would you know of the Holocaust?" Magneto, with a pause, says, "Far too much, Senator." Dropping him to his death, the Senator closes his eyes, preparing for impact. But there's no splatter sound. We see Kelly bracing for impact. He opens his eyes to see himself floating inches above the floor. He looks to his left, and all he sees is a blue boot. He looks up, and it's Jean Grey. The Senator simply saying, "Marvelous." It's kind of a nod to her Marvel Girl title. Standing to his feet, he thanks the X-Men. Jean slaps him in the face. "That's for attacking our home." Cyclops asks if the Senator is alright. The Senator says that he'll live. Iceman, looking up, says, "We got company," as Magneto is making his way down to the street level. He grabs metal from the surrounding buildings, throwing it down at our heroes. Cyclops yells Bobby's name. Bobby says, "On it." Shielding the team in a swath of ice, next he yells Angel's name. Angel grabs the Senator and gets him out of there. Magneto goes to stop him, throwing a car at his way, but Angel evades the debris whilst holding the Senator. Magneto's concentration is shattered as he's blasted by Cyclops. Suddenly our X-Men and Magneto are at street level. Magneto, with naive confidence, thinks he has the X-Men in the palm of his hand in the same way he took them out the first time, so he decides to monologue a bit, bring the X-Men's fears, self-doubt to the forefront, making them feel uneasy, not confident. He tells Hank that you hated yourself so much that you turned yourself into a bigger monster than the one you already saw yourself as, a true beast. Jean, defending her, says, "Enough." Magneto responds, "Little girl, if you had more of a spine, maybe I would listen." Bobby, taunting Magneto, says, "Maybe if that ugly helmet wasn't in the way, you could listen." Magneto responds that he'll teach him manners. A scuffle ensues. Now that scuffle needs to be the definitive on-screen X-Men fight. I want it to have the same creativity, sense of character, spectacle, and intensity as Dumbledore vs Voldemort. A back and forth of offensive and defensive clashes. Perhaps Jean leads by throwing a barrage of cars at him. Magneto deflects them with his magnetic fields. Beast then moves in to take a shot, but Magneto dodges that too. Perhaps Magneto grabs the parked X-Jet and hits Beast with it, knocking him across the street. Jean picks up a pool of water, cocooning Magneto. Cyclops telling Bobby to freeze the water. Magneto breaks free before it becomes solid though. Cyclops shoots his optic blast at him, but again Magneto defends them with his magnetic shield, using his other hand to cause a bit of chaos. With Cyclops taken out by the debris, Magneto goes to throw a car or two their way, but it's blocked by Bobby's ice wall. Magneto senses everything magnetic in the area, utilizing it to his advantage, throwing it our hero's way. Eventually, one by one, the five are held down by the debris. Magneto continuing to exchange dialogue with Scott. Magneto saying, "We want the same things. We both wanted Master Mold destroyed. We both want to ensure the safety of mutant kind." What's most crazy about this exchange is that Magneto is right. Cyclops and Magneto do want the same things. It's just his approach that he cannot agree with. Whilst the X-Men make a valiant effort to stop Magneto, they get into a position where they are pinned down again. Magneto removes Scott's visor, forcing him to close his eyes. Jean's hands are bound. Beast is unconscious, with Iceman and Angel trapped too. Magneto makes a gun finger motion with his hand, points it at the ground, and releases a directed gravitational pulse using magnetic waves that acts like a shotgun, kinda like a pressure cannon. He states, "That was a warning shot." He puts his fingers to Angel's head. He says, "Tell me where you hid Kelly." Cyclops' eyes close, yells out, "Killing Kelly won't stop the MRD, it won't bring peace." Magneto moves his hand just to the right of Angel's head, firing another warning shot. Yelling at Scott, he says, "The death of Hitler was the snowball effect that led to the Allies winning the war. This is the same thing, Scott. Kill the figurehead and the dream dies too. Now tell me, Warren, where did you put him?" Jean enters Scott's mind. "Scott, I need you to trust me. Open your eyes." Scott understands that there is no plans to get out of this. Scott, after mustering enough courage, after believing in Jean, opens his eyes slowly and faces Magneto. Magneto is ready to open fire on Warren. Jean yells out, "Hey asshole." Magneto turns to Jean. Jean follows it up with, "Let us know if this is enough spine for you." Magneto snaps and turns to Cyclops, and we see this blast just engulf the entire screen, the force of it blowing his helmet clean off. Our heroes look like they've defeated Magneto as his magnetic grip on them releases. Jean puts Scott's visor back on and they share a kiss. Iceman checks on Beast to see if he's alright, and Angel points out the civilians emerging from the distance. They approach the X-Men, iPhones recording them. "Who are you guys?" they ask. Cyclops steps forward. "We're the X-Men, and we are mutants." The crowd takes a step back. Cyclops takes one forward. "We don't mean any harm." He goes on to say that Senator Kelly and the media has made you believe that we are dangerous, and while some of us do have incredible gifts, we are not the enemy. We are not just your neighbor or the person sitting next to you in class, we are also your loved one, a brother, a wife. We deserve the same recognition as any other person, because at its core, we are no different to you. We feel the same, bleed the same. Essentially, the point of this is to establish that the X-Men are heroes in the public eye. Sure, there'll be mutant hate in future movies, but this will simply identify why Charles was right and his dream is achievable, and why Magneto was ultimately wrong. So yeah, that's the climax. Now, in regards to antagonists, we must understand that they are crucial to our character's evolution. pushing our characters towards change, that a hero's journey is only compelling when the forces moving against them make them change. Applying this to our story, Cyclops has begun the narrative completely believing in Xavier's dream, but as he finds out more and more about Xavier, as he sees the reality of Magneto's mission, that they're after the same things, he starts to understand, to a degree, that he is also right. Now, regardless of them having to defeat Magneto, this admission, understanding that Magneto is partially correct, means Magneto has won to a degree without winning. Kind of like how the Joker lost, but succeeded in corrupting Dent. In a way, he won. After a quick applause by the public, Iceman says cautiously, "Guys, he's gone." The team turns to see Magneto has vanished from the scene ending as we pull away from the X-Men. The sound of news and TV reporters going on in the background, new heroes on the block, the X-Men, mutants, friends or foes, basically just playing clips to get mutant chatter talking. Transitioning to the X-Mansion, Charles thanks Warren for paying for the rebuild. Warren's saying not to worry about it, that it's on Dad's cards, that if he's going to pay to have it destroyed, then he can pay to fix it too. The professor offers him a place to stay, but Warren declines, saying that someone needs to keep an eye on his father. Wind outside the mansion begins to blow as we see a Quinjet come down to land uninvited. Warren gets defensive, standing in front of Xavier, but Hank yells out, "There's no need for that, that's for me." What we find out is that Beast is leaving the X-Mansion to join S.W.O.R.D. After finding out that he had his mind manipulated by his mentor, after seeing firsthand that mentor train a bunch of kids to be his paramilitary force, he just can't stick around. He thinks his mind, his assets, are better served elsewhere, at the peak command deck in space, working for S.W.O.R.D., just like he did in the comics. Now, this makes a lot of sense for the character, but also the X-Men. The X-Men probably have the closest ties to S.W.O.R.D. out of any superhero team, so having Beast join them is just a natural progression of that developing relationship. Beast may leave, feeling as though he has a different approach to Charles fundamentally, that he just can't stick around, how both characterize what peace is. However, he does leave on somewhat good terms, saying that if they ever need him, he's only a call away. As for Scott, Charles is able to reconcile with him, bring him back under the fold, seeing as he's raised the man as his son, it's not all too hard. He trusts him to be the leader and the face of mutant kind going forward, saying that this new world we're entering is going to need a face, and Scott is the perfect man for that role. Charles doubles down, saying that he could have freezed all the civilians in NYC just as he did at the start of the movie. But this is the time for mutants to emerge, and Scott needs to be the face of that. Scott is used to taking on responsibility and agrees that it's his burden to carry. Charles wheels away as Scott looks over the sunrise. All of a sudden, Jean floats in, surprising him, the two sharing a moment, reflecting on what they learned, that Jean learnt to be headstrong, defiant in the face of Magneto's wrath. Scott joking that it was kind of hot how headstrong she was. Wait till he gets a load of her in the third movie, am I right? Scott also reflects that he was able to become the leader he had to be to stop an impending race war, the two sealing the movie with a kiss. Now, that's our story. In regards to character arcs, you might notice that Scott has a flat character arc here. In other words, he is asked to uphold his inner truth, his belief in Xavier's dream despite the forces of humanity and Magneto trying to break him, to question that belief. To Beast, however, it follows a bittersweet arc, ending in a less positive note than Cyclops, but one that fulfills his needs, yet not his wants. His needs being to maintain his philosophical consistency, his morals. His wants being to stay with the X-Men, something he just cannot do without sacrificing his needs. Something I wanted to highlight here is the importance of teamwork, of unity and working together. If you notice carefully, we have some great examples. Humans are shown to be divided amongst each other on what to do. Warren's father kicking back at helping, likewise with our board of generals. Magneto also illustrates how operating alone does not pay off. And then there's our X-Men, who operates as a team. Here, we're shown that united, working together, they can overcome any threat, something they couldn't do alone. Alternatively, there is another layer to this. Our team understands the power of teamwork so well that it makes them understand the danger Master Mold holds. If mutant-killing robots learned the power of teamwork by coming online as an AI, as a hive mind, well, that could mean the end of mutants, hence their haste in wanting to shut it down. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this. We've managed to do a lot. Solve the issue of Magneto's origin, explain mutants in the MCU, tell a balanced ensemble movie that tells the origin of pretty much every character, weaving it into said story. We've established the first class, established the core themes, all elements we can hopefully expand on in the second movie. Now, part 2 and 3 will only happen depending on how well this video does, so if you dug it, share it with your friends. Let the world know that there is an X-Men fanfic out there. With that being said, I have to thank the amazing people responsible for making this video happen. I wouldn't be able to dip for 3 months and make this without my Illuminati members on Patreon. Gems like Daniel, Julian, Christos, Screenspark, David, Draco, Lidge, Alexis, Lance, Holland, James, William, Carson, Braden, Michael, Ziggy, Jacob, Chando, and The Comic. Seriously, thank you so damn much. It means the world that y'all supported this. With that being said, it's back to content as usual, so if you dug this video, feel free to sub. Also, it may seem small, but a like really does help these videos out. Thanks so much, and I will see you guys in the next video. Ciao.